in zones of conflict is like this very kind of strange situation that you can walk around a house, and on one side is like totally, like destroyed and it looks devastating. And on the other side, they're like people following their lives as before. So I would say on one hand, this is actually very beautiful to see that life goes on, right? That people are managing and trying just to go on with their lives no matter what. And on the other hand, of course, it's very kind of a disturbing image. Like, how can you like follow your lives while around there is like death and suffering? But I would say it's the resilience of people in this moment that is stronger than the brutal force of any weapon. So I would say in a way it's positive.
Thomas Edison, Richard Branson, John F. Kennedy, Mozart, Michael Jordan, Will Smith. That sounds like a list of highly successful titans in a variety of vocations. Why is it that we rarely hear that they have or had ADHD? And you know what we hear even less about? Serena Williams, Emma Watson, Mel Robbins, Whoopi Goldberg, Agatha Christie, Erin Brockovich, Cher. Yeah, the successful women navigating ADHD. And that's exactly why I started this podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, a lifelong student, now a coach. I'm also the creator of Your ADHD Brain is A-OK, a system that helps people like you figure out what they should do with their life. And we're here today to talk ADHD, your strengths, your symptoms, your workarounds, and how you proudly stand out instead of trying to fit in. I credit my ADHD for some of my greatest gifts. And you know what? I spy a happier life for you too. So without further ado, a shiny new episode is starting now. Hello, I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for episode number 205 of the ADHD for Smartass Women. I hope you'll subscribe to this podcast and our newsletter over at tracyotsuka.com. If you're a regular listener, you likely know about my signature program, Your ADHD Brain is A-OK. We call it A-OK for short. And this is the 6-week program that I built off of my patented cartography system that helps ADHD women figure out what they should do with their life. With A-OK, we are going to figure out who you really are, what's important to you, what you value, and what your strengths, passions, superpowers, and purpose are. And then you're going to build your life around that. A-OK includes live office hours with me, a community of other ADHD women that are just like you, the A-OK system worksheets, and you're going to create your own A-OK intelligence report. And I promise you, it's a lot of fun. So we're going to start on Tuesday, January 24th. It's my first A-OK in the month of January. And then we're going to have our first office hours on Wednesday, the 25th, and every Wednesday after that for the next 6 weeks. What a great way to finally discover who you are exactly and what you're meant to do with your one life. And what a great way to start the new year. So if you book with the code HOLIDAYS2, you're going to get $100 off of Your ADHD Brain is A-OK until the program is full. So I'm not sure if that's going to be in this next week or the following week. If you're interested in giving yourself a gift over the holidays and want to know more, pop on over to tracyotsuka.com/AOK. And don't forget to use the code HOLIDAYS2. I'd love to have you join us. So now let's get on to our podcast. So my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. In the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met a one that wasn't truly amazing at something. And boy, do I have an amazing woman to introduce you to today. So for all of these reasons, I am just delighted to introduce you to Luzia Tschirky. Luzia Tschirky was born and raised in the Swiss mountains in a small town close to the border of Austria and Lichtenstein. As a child, she knew she wanted to become a journalist, so much so that she began working for the local newspaper at the age of 14. 6 years later, at 20, she found herself in Russia as a delegate for the European Youth Press, where she attended an event about free speech and journalism. This experience prompted Luzia to start traveling to several countries in the so-called post-Soviet space. She also began learning Russian. In the following years, Luzia continued to work in journalism, mainly for Swiss public broadcaster SRF. She is now 28 years old and their first ever female correspondent in Moscow, where she covers all post-Soviet countries, including Russia and Ukraine. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February, Luzia was in Kiev with rockets exploding outside of her hotel window. In the past 9 months covering the war, Luzia has started to appreciate her ADHD brain like never before. Luzia, did I get all that right?
Yeah, you did. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, I'm just delighted to have you here. Okay, so my first thought was, did I pronounce your name right?
You totally did. It's very difficult to pronounce my name, even for people in Switzerland, so you did perfectly well.
Wonderful. And then I think I mispronounced. Did I say Kiev? It's Kyiv, right?
Kiev, right, in the Ukrainian version of the city name. It's Kiev.
Okay, so I want to make sure I use that. So it's Kyiv.
Right.
Okay. And then Ukraine?
Ukraine is correct, right?
Okay. I have, and I know when the war first started, I know we were all saying the Ukraine and no, it's Ukraine. And so then I'm always worried about how I pronounce things. And then I wasn't sure where the accent was on Ukraine. Was it in the beginning or at the end? So I appreciate it. So before we get into what it is that you do now, which is just so fascinating, can we talk about your ADHD diagnoses first?
Yeah, sure. So I was diagnosed when I was 17 years old. I was attending high school back then in Switzerland, in this small town where I grew up. And I just had big problems, sitting still, during lessons, which, like from my perspective, were never ending. And I just didn't know what was going on with me. I never had that problem like on such a scale before, that I really could not sit still and my thoughts were just running somewhere out, just very far away from anything happening in class. So I thought at some point that I would need help, talking to someone, because I had the feeling that something really was wrong with me up to some point. So I went to see a psychiatrist in a town close by, and he actually asked me whether I thought about ADHD. And I was just very surprised, because I have heard of it before, but it was more connected, like to young boys and, having their emotions not under control, things like that. And I was just not ready for the diagnosis back then. I have the impression I really thought like, this is not something I could relate to. He gave me a book, which I read about, women and ADHD, which was very progressive at this time. I think we're talking about the year 2007 or something. But this book was more about, like the women, later in their life, having already several children, and were just kind of feeling overwhelmed with all the workload and all the, workload at home at the same time. So I thought like, I really cannot relate to this. And he just suggested to me, well, why don't you take medicine? There's good medicine for this. And I thought like, I was 17. I thought like, what, you're going to tell me I need some medicine? And I was really like kind of this teenager, not really coming to terms with it, and not really having, like someone I could talk to whom I could relate more. I really had the impression that there was no one out there I really kind of felt understood talking with. So I forgot just about this diagnosis. And only a few years later, when I was already like 25, I was studying at university, and I was at the same time working. And I just had the impression that, there were things going on in my life, which I just could not understand. I thought like, I cannot understand why I reacted this way. Why did I forget things that were so important to me? Like things that could be at work, but mostly like private things that I just would forget. And I could not explain to people really close to me why did I forget about it? And I just thought about this diagnosis back then again. And I thought like, maybe it's time that I really think about it, because it's, it's not only like a thing that is hurting me, but it has also like an influence on my surroundings. So it was at the age of 25 when I really started getting help for it, and, like professional help. And I think that was the moment when I came to terms with it and also understood a lot more about my life before, what was going on, why I was like reacting in certain situations this way, or why it happened at all, that I was forgetting really kind of important things.
So can you give us an example, Luzia, when you say you were forgetting really important things and you couldn't explain them? Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, for example, I agreed to a meeting, with friends, and I just would forget about it. I agreed that we would meet somewhere, and I just forget about it. And, like friends were waiting for me and I was not showing up. Like things like this happen, quite often. And I just could not explain to myself, why did it happen? I forgot it. Or I just came very late, because I forgot about it. And then I was showing up really late. And of course, like, it's very difficult, like to, even when you then arrive late and then they ask, where have you been? And you're like, well, I forgot about it again. It's like at a certain point, you just realize there is something going on I need to have a look at, because
yeah, and it makes you feel like, well, they feel like you don't care, and that couldn't be further from the truth. You just literally forgot.
And then you explain to them, well, it is really important, and I would like to show up on time. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then,
right.
Think about it. I mean, I grew up in Switzerland, and,
Oh, wow.
things in this country are always on time, every time. So when you are the person running late always, it's kind of, in this society, not really accepted. Being late is like a huge problem, really a huge problem.
So were those the kinds of things that you had the most trouble with? Or I know you said you had trouble in school, but I'm curious, were there certain subjects that you had a lot of trouble in, and then other subjects that were super easy for you?
Well, there were subjects which were super easy for me, but this did not help, me being more attentive in class, because I was not, really, it was very difficult for me from a very, young age to stay calm in class. For example, I could read very fast, and I did not understand how other children were not able to read as fast. So we were, like, one child was saying one sentence, and then the other child was repeating it, and we were moving on so slowly. And it was, for me, it was just like, I don't know, torture, sitting there and waiting until this child next to me would finish this sentence forever. It was like this, horrible.
So were you the kind of child who was disruptive when you were that bored? Or were you the kind of child who would just go into your own dream world? So I guess I'm asking, were you diagnosed inattentive or combined type hyperactive?
It's very interesting. This distinction actually does not really, I'm not sure about other European countries, but in Switzerland, it's not made. So you just get like the diagnosis ADHD, and that's it. There was no further discussion, into which kind of type you fit more, or whether you're the combined type. I think of myself that I'm the combined type, just because, like at the very young age, I was more of this hyperactive child. And then when I grew older, I was, like more, it was more in the hyperactivity moved more into my head. So I was more just like, running thoughts really far away from anything happening around me after the age of, I would say, like 14, 15, maybe. And as a child, I was just very loud in class. I thought of myself that I'm just, having fun. And, like it was so easy in school for me, during the first grade. So I was just very bored, and I actually got kicked out. I think I spent like most of the lessons of my first and second grade just outside of the classroom, because like the teacher just like every time she just kicked me out of the classroom and said, you need to sit here for the rest of the lesson. So I spent like so many hours in this hallway. I don't know.
What's so interesting is I think having ADHD is difficult enough in the United States, but I cannot imagine a country or countries like Switzerland and Germany where everything is so exact and everything is run by time. It must really be difficult there.
can imagine in Switzerland, for the trains, like for the train leaving, it's legal if the train leaves like 3 minutes even early, right?
Oh
So
no.
every time when you need to get on a train and you have ADHD and you have like this time blindness thing, it's a
Yes.
real challenge. And it's something like, with you get so stressed out about it because you know how people will have a look at you and, like will react to you if you're not like on time. It's really something that I came to terms with after really reading a lot about ADHD and really understanding that it's not, like a character flaw, but that is something in my brain that makes it so difficult for me to be on time.
Absolutely. The other thing that you said about in Switzerland, there is no difference between, well, you don't have the three different types of ADHD. And the more I learn about ADHD, I wonder, are there really three different types? Because even with the inattentive women, I have never met one of them who didn't show some form of hyperactivity, somatically, like with the body, tapping their feet or picking on their cuticles. And then we know that what's going on in the brain, where the brain is moving so fast, that alone is hyperactivity. So I'm starting to question, don't we all have some form of hyperactivity, even if it means that it's just our thoughts? But what I have seen is it's never just your thoughts. There is always some sort of movement, some sort of activity that we don't even see, as hyperactivity, like picking your cuticles, or pulling your hair or twisting in your seat. So I find that interesting. So once you accepted the diagnoses, and it sounds like it took several years after you were first diagnosed, what did that change?
Well, I would say it changed a lot because for the first time, I really understood like how things went was not, always my intention, right? So that it was not something I deliberately actually made certain mistakes, did not show up when I really will, when it was actually my wish to show up to people and
Yeah.
to myself as well. So I would say it was really a turning point because I, for the first time, was really opening myself up to it and was really ready for reading it and was really ready for thinking about, how certain things in the past might have been influenced by my ADHD and about what things could I change about it. Still, it was sometimes difficult because, you feel like you're more than these kind of diagnoses. And it felt sometimes, of course, that it was just like, it was a struggle to overcome, to find like the right time manager and the right things of medicine, to get over it kind of. It was just an obstacle. But then this year, I think I really learned that it was also something I can be not only proud of, but can be really of use, like not only for me, but also like for my work. In this year, I learned so much about how ADHD in extreme situations can be of a, like, can be really, really an asset to have.
Okay, so tell us about that. Tell us what's going on. So before you start, where are you now?
At the very moment, I'm sitting in Switzerland, not so far away from Zurich, which is the biggest city of the country.
Okay. But you've spent a good amount of the year in Ukraine, right?
Right.
So tell us what's going on.
Well, there is war going on. For example, today, like most people I heard of in Kiev, like in the capital of Ukraine, they don't have water or electricity because the Russian army attacked the infrastructure all over the country, but especially also in the capital, which means like they're at the very moment they just have a blackout. So the electricity providers are not able to provide electricity anymore because most of the power stations of the country got hit by rockets within the last, I would say, it's now already 6 weeks. And since the beginning of the war, there is like air raids all the time, all over the country. There is practically no day without air raids in Ukraine. People are dying, especially in the eastern part of the country, in the part of the country where the Russian army occupied territory. So this is mostly eastern, northern, and southern part of the country. At the very moment, like the Ukrainian army had, really big successes in the past 2 months. So they were able to free big amounts of territory in the north, but it's still like very heavy fighting in the eastern part, so close to Donetsk and Luhansk. There really many people are dying, we're not talking only about soldiers, but of course about civilians, because the weapons used in this war since the very first day are weapons which, civilians will suffer for sure. There is no possibility that no civilians will suffer, because these kind of weapons are far too destructive to be, so pointed to us that only like soldiers would die, which would already be very bad. But of course,
Aren't they also targeting? I thought I read, I think it was yesterday, that another hospital was hit, but I thought that it was actually targeted. Or is it just, it's the result of what you were just saying, that you can't be very pointed in what you hit. So everything around it doesn't matter if it's civilians, gets hit.
Well, it depends, I would say. They're targeting, civilians and civilian infrastructure. Well, the Russian army is deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure in some cases. Yeah, I've seen it myself. So, for example, when you think about an air bomb, so a plane is flying over a town, dropping a bomb. So, like, the pilot knows what he is doing. So he has like the concrete coordinates of a certain point, and he knows exactly where he's dropping the bomb. Well, nowadays in 21st century, he knows it for sure. About the weapons, it depends on the weapons, sometimes on the rockets, whether they're really, hitting a target by purpose, or whether they, did not hit the target correctly, because there are certain Soviet made weapons which are not as precise as, like modern weapons, especially weapons, produced in the West. So I've seen places myself, for example, in Izium, which is in the northeast of the country, which got liberated by the Ukrainian army in September. I went to this town a few days after the liberation by the Ukrainian army, and I've seen it myself, like a house, for example, that was targeted by an air bomb, and this house was a house full of civilians, and just like with one bomb, there were more than 50 people just killed in the spot. So there were families, like whole families that were just, like wiped out, like, so to say. There's like a family where it's like the grandfather of the family is left, and all his family members are dead. And he was in there, and he was a survivor of this attack. And there's just like, there are no words to describe, like at a place like this, when you see that what's going on, there is no explanation for it. I mean, it's like whatever happens on Earth, there is no reason to drop a bomb on a house of civilians. Like, there is no reason for it. And of course, it's I would say it's the hardest part to see all this horror and to understand that, any infrastructure you can rebuild. But if people are dying, there is no way you get them back, right? They're gone. And for those family members, there is no way that their husband or wife or children or grandchildren are ever coming back. So this is the most devastating thing, I would say.
And then the effects of all of this trauma, which we now know can go on for generations.
Well, I would say if there is any, expert on trauma listening to this podcast, there is such a huge demand in Ukraine. I thought about it in the very first days. I remember we were attending a funeral in Lviv. This is in the very western part of the country. It was like a funeral of soldiers, of 3 Ukrainian soldiers. And I was asking a young woman standing close to the church whether she knows who we might need to approach for getting permission to film inside of the church. And the lady said, "Oh, I don't know. It's a funeral of my dad." And she looked to me and said, like, "I'm so afraid going inside, because I was there where, my father was killed." So she talked about it, that she was actually a translator for the Ukrainian army, and she was at the same military base as her father when the military base got attacked by the Russians with rockets. So she survived, but she saw belongings of her father lying under the rubble, and so she had like really, really traumatic experiences, and she was not able to go into buildings after that, because she was so afraid that the building as the building she has been to, would break down on her. So she would be again under the rubble. And I really had the impression that at this moment, my job as a journalist normally is to talk to people. Actually, it's like the job I do. But in this situation, like in many other situations, I decided I rather not talk to the person, not to cause any re-traumatization before this
Yes.
person talk to an expert. She should not give any interview, right? Because I can really hurt her even more if she needs to relive all the horrible things she has seen. So it's really important from my perspective in this moment not to, to put yourself first in your job, but like the health of the person you're actually talking to. So
Yes. Yes. And I think when we see the footage, here in the United States, it just looks like rubble. And what we forget is that Ukraine is a very modern country. I mean, you feel like you're going anywhere in Europe, right? And so I'm curious, when you're walking around, is that what it looks like today? Is it, there are just certain parts of the country that are devastated, but then you'll have other parts where everybody is going on and working and doing what they did before? Or is the whole country affected?
I would say it's like in war zones or in zones of conflict, it's like this very kind of strange situation that you can walk around a house and on one side is like totally, like destroyed and it looks devastating. And on the other side, there are like people following their lives as before. So I would say on one hand, this is actually very beautiful to see that life goes on, right? That people are managing and trying just to go on with their lives no matter what. And on the other hand, of course, it's very kind of a disturbing image. Like, how can you like follow your lives while around there is like death and suffering? But I would say it's the resilience of people in this moment that is stronger than the brutal force of any weapon. So I would say in a way it's positive. In Ukraine, about the picture, I would say, well, it really depends how much a place got hit by the Russian army. There are suburbs of Kiev in the northern part, which are closer to the Belarusian border. So like Bucha, maybe someone has heard of it, or
Yeah.
Irpin. And they got really hit very hard. So when you're walking down a street in Bucha or Irpin, still you might see, that the Russian army destroyed huge parts of these towns. But in other parts of Ukraine, you can walk down a street and you will not immediately see, oh, there's a war going on. Of course, certain things have changed in every part of the country. So, for example, like the shortage of electricity is a problem everywhere in Ukraine.
Yeah. Oh,
There's nearly no place in Ukraine which did not get affected by, these targeted attacks of the infrastructure. So this problem, I think, is really affecting everyone in the country. But of course, I mean, you would just see like that towns are just dark at a certain time of the day. So, like for example, in Kiev, they switched off the electricity, like to save electricity for those very critical infrastructures like the hospitals or the military infrastructure or anything related to the government. So they switched off for all the other household electricity like twice a day for several hours, for example, in certain districts of Kiev. So, of course, you would walk through the center and it could be that it's totally dark. And of course, this is something you would never have seen before. There would be like street lights and
yeah.
advertisement everywhere. So, of course, it's something you immediately see, even if it's not like rubble and, like bombed houses or something. So it depends really much where you are.
How are the Ukrainian people actually doing? I mean, from here, again, in the States, it just looks like there's even more resolve. When you're around the people, do you feel that as well?
I would say most of the people just have no choice, right? So this is your life and your life is under attack. Like every aspect of your life is under attack because many people have lost their jobs, for example, because like companies were not able, how you do business during wartime. Maybe it's working for a month, maybe for 2, maybe for 3, but after a certain point, you just do not have like the money anymore to pay all your employees, for example. So this is a huge problem, of course, that people have lost their jobs. They're now sitting in their homes without electricity, in many parts of Ukraine without heating. And of course, this is like life is really difficult for many. But I would say when your life is so much under attack and every aspect of it is under attack, you're trying to keep up because you have like the choice between giving up, and this is not a choice. So you move on, you try to handle as good as you can. And of course it depends, of course it depends on every person, how one is reacting. But I would say, especially in this part of the world, people have like this family experience of, I don't know how to put it even in words, this family experience of tremendous suffering and trauma within your family, because like these people got affected by 70 years of Soviet Union and by the Second World War. So they have like in their DNA, I would say, they really have this kind of survival instinct. I would say if something like this would happen in Switzerland, like people would not cope so good as people do in Ukraine, because I saw it, for example, I remember COVID, right? Like for people in Switzerland, this was like never ever before people could think about such a situation, right? Like most probably in every country of the world. But I had the impression like for Swiss people, it was especially hard because, we were not affected by Second World War in the way like other European countries were, right? So the Nazis did not invade Switzerland. We were, like for different reason, one can say, but like we were very, very lucky in history. So people really do not have this
resilience.
Yes, I would say it's something new. It's for them, it's like such a crisis on such a level. It's really not something, they could talk to someone and have like an experience in their family to share, to be shared with. It's absolutely out of anything people know here. So
you were in Kyiv when the war broke out.
Yes.
Did you know that this was going to happen, or was this something that all of a sudden you're just in the middle of this war zone?
Well, we thought that something bad would happen, and this was clear for quite some time. So I remember traveling to the border, like the border region between Russia and Ukraine in spring 2021, actually. So like in April and May 2021, when there was already, like many Russian troops in the border region and nobody exactly knew what was going on. And back then it was still possible to go to this region for me. At the very moment, it's not possible. So back then it was clear, okay, this is something not really looking good. And there's some planning behind this, but nobody really understood what was going on.
Or 100% believed it was going to happen, right? Because I know we on the other side of the world were thinking, oh, this isn't going to happen. Is this really going to happen? He's not going to do that.
Well, to be very honest, I would say like the United States, or like the intelligence services of the United States, I'm not really sure which agency really was gathering the intelligence at this point, they were aware of it. So the ambassador of the United States was not in Kiev on the 24th of February compared to the ambassador of Switzerland, who was in Kiev on the 24th of February. So I would say they moved out of Kiev for a reason. So they knew that something was going to happen, and there is now, like, as far as it is publicly known, the Ukrainian government was informed by the intelligence services of the United States and of Great Britain, of the UK, that something was going to happen. I think there was like a discussion about the exact date.
Yes, I think I remember. Weren't they all ordered back and they were telling everybody to get out?
Yes.
From the United States. Yeah, okay, now I remember. Yeah, you're right.
So always now, when I try to estimate, are things going to be bad in Kiev or not, I always try to figure out whether the ambassador of the United States is in Kiev or not. So when the ambassador of the United States just, showed up at some event or, met with someone in Kiev, then I know, okay, well, in Kiev, it's not going to be so bad, right? So it's like, it sounds kind of maybe a little bit stupid, but this is kind of the thing when you try to think about, what kind of information is not publicly known, but maybe, you can find a workaround to get to more information, even without having any access, because, I'm a Swiss journalist working for Swiss public broadcaster, which is compared to, I don't know, any big broadcasting station like, I don't know, the BBC or CNN. It's just not comparable. When I see those guys in Ukraine, I'm like, okay, I'm such a small fish, like compared, because I don't know how many correspondents at the very moment they have in Ukraine. It's just like a lot of people, really a lot of people. And they have always, like these many security guards around them. Most of the time, former soldiers, which is also kind of this very special kind of security team most of the time, because these soldiers have experience most of the time in Afghanistan or Iraq, and most of them are not really, they don't know the post-Soviet like space. They don't know Ukraine. They don't know Ukrainian or the Russian language. So they're actually sometimes I really had like interesting meetings when I really thought like, are you really sure that you're actually helping with security with, like for the journalist, or are you more a security concern? I mean, I'm traveling with, I'm not sure, but at certain points, I really had the impression that I'm not really sure whether spending all that money on these security guys is always very wise. I'm not saying it about everyone, but I just had certain impressions that sometimes I'm wondering, are you really good advisors in the region, or are you more, yeah.
So you've said a couple times that this year really taught you a lot about how your ADHD brain works. And I think what you said too is basically having the benefits, right, of having an ADHD brain, that it really made a difference. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So imagine it's February and outside of your window, you hear these boom, boom explosions. And you realize, okay, they're bombing Kiev. You just have heard like the president of the Russian Federation giving a public announcement that he's going to start what he called a special military operation. But of course, this is a war. There's no question about it. And I just kind of functioned. I put on my vest, I put on my helmet, I brushed my teeth, and I called my cameraman and said, we're getting out. And he was ready to get out because I had like this impression things are going to be bad. I just had, like this gut feeling that something was going to be really, really not in a good direction. And still, I was not convinced, like the night before, I still was not convinced that the Russian army is going to bomb Kiev. But I had like the impression that it might be wise to be able to get very fast out of town. So I advised my cameraman, the night before, just get your car ready, try, all your things that you need for, leaving town very fast, get your things together because we might need to get out very fast. So a few hours later, it turned out to be that I was, totally right. I mean, it was not as bad as in Mariupol, which is in the southern east part of the country, or in Kramatorsk. This is also in the east, but still it was bad in Kiev. So I think in this very moment, my ADHD really helped me to focus because it was such an extreme situation. And I remember, I got calls from my editors in Zurich. And of course, it was a super overwhelming situation for everyone. I mean, this situation, by no means you can call this normal at all. But I really had the impression that I was more focused and more calm than editors in Zurich who called me, like they were totally freaking out on the phone. And I was like, I just had the impression I'm trying to calm them down. I said like, yeah, hey, now we're driving out of the city. Yeah, we can do this live broadcast. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I know it's war. I know it's horrible, but we will do this special broadcast, and the special broadcast is going to be interesting to watch. So I try to really focus them back on work and, losing their mind even more, And this was an impression when I hung up the phone, I thought like, this is crazy. I actually tried to calm down this person, and this person is sitting in Zurich and I'm here outside, like just, like trying to drive out of Kiev. And there was a huge car traffic, like people were trying to flee panically because nobody knew what was going to happen, right? And I mean, the 24th of February, it was really a dangerous situation, actually, because we were driving out of Kiev through a highway that is going north. So actually a highway that goes through towns like Bucha, Irpin, and Borodyanka, which got heavily hit by the Russian army afterwards. And as it turned out, like just a few hours later on the same highway, there were already civilians attacked, like civilian cars on the same highway I took were attacked a few hours later because special forces of the Russian army were already at an airport in Gostomel, which is a little bit in the northwest of Kiev. So we were driving by there. We already had like our live broadcast with the TV station just a few kilometers away from these Russian special forces, which I did not know at the very moment that so close they were like Russian special forces. When I think about it now, it's of course very scary, and you think like, okay, this could have gone totally wrong. But in this very moment, I was really focused. I was really kind of, not trying to pay attention to anything else going on than the most important thing. And this was like focusing on what is right, in front of your nose and nothing else. And I would say my ADHD really helped me at this point, because I'm quite sure that I would not have been able to focus, which is so weird, right? Because you think, oh, like ADHD people have problems to focus. But in such a moment of crisis and extreme situation, your brain actually is doing wonders, right? Your brain is working like a smooth machine. It's crazy, but you really don't have any, you don't waste time on questions. Like I had the impression many people around me were wasting time on questions that were not questions for me anymore. Like I remembered I was standing outside of this hotel waiting with my luggage for my cameraman to pick me up. And there were other journalists, like gathering in front of this hotel, not knowing what to do. And there was this young lady, and she was like looking at me and saying, "Are you putting on your vest and your helmet? Do I really need to do this? This is kind of heavy. I don't like to wear it." And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't like bombs and rockets. And I think I heard some explosions like just a few minutes ago. So I put that on. I mean, you can decide on your own. But in this moment, I'm just not I'm not really like into discussing, is it too heavy for me to wear or not? I rather wear it than getting hit.
So it's the intensity that just made you even more focused, right? Or made you more focused than you ordinarily would be.
I would say so, because at this very moment, it's like your ADHD brain is just in this moment when there's no other way you could think about around it. There's just like this one thing going on, and you focus on that, and then it works perfectly well. There is no need to think about it. Maybe I could take another route, or maybe I could do something else. No, at this very moment, there's just like this road, and you drive down this road. That's it.
What's interesting too is that your broadcaster, all they care about is get out. And you're like, well, I'm here anyway, so why don't we make use of this, right? We can, I can record, I can film, right? Report.
Yeah, we had this, we agreed that if something would happen, we would do a live broadcast. But of course, really nobody at our news station thought that they're really going to bomb Kiev. We thought like, yeah, it's going to be bad in the eastern part of the country, but that they would actually bomb Kiev, we did not take that so serious at this, before. So this broadcast was actually agreed on before. So if something happens, we're gonna do a live broadcast, but nobody thought about it, that it would really, that I would be at such an amount of danger, surrounding me. Nobody thought about this. And I think maybe it was just enough, like the things we knew back then, it was enough, for me to react, because to be really prepared, you can be prepared only to a certain amount. You cannot be prepared to everything. So in this moment, when you hear like the rockets exploding, you can think about what could they have, been shot at, what kind of infrastructure could be now targeted, because, like the first day they just like bombed basically every airport in the country. So like every airport got hit. So you could think about it. Okay, where are all the airports, for example, right? Or where are military bases? Very big military bases got hit as well. So you can try to figure out a way out of town, but there is always going to be like a certain amount of insecurity. And I think the ADHD brain helps with that as well, because you are always dealing with so many options in your head, so that when you need to think really fast and make very fast decisions, your brain is just kind of more used to it, to this handling of many, many options. And then in a moment when you really need to take a decision within very few seconds, I think this is my impression of having, like working with my brain during the past few months, that my brain is working faster in some ways that really, I don't know.
And it's almost easier because we have all these ideas. And so we struggle to make decisions at times versus here, it's life or death. It's so intense that it's really easy for us, so much easier, right? To make that one decision rather than having to consider all these other decisions. We don't have time.
Totally. And I would say, to a certain point, it makes life easier, because this is something I also kind of realized during the last few months, that it's kind of a test for all the people around you, because you get to know people really fast. You get to know people really fast in a way that you really understand who can you count on in an extreme situation and who is really not going to show up, right? At a certain point when you really need their help. So I would say this is also like of helping you to understand what kind of relations are really worth going for it, and like investing time and energy into it, and which kind of relations are not so useful. Actually, I always kind of remember the sentence a good friend of mine told me. She comes from the Czech Republic. Her parents came to Switzerland in the 80s, and she is Jewish, and her grandmother has been to Auschwitz, and her grandmother told her once, like, choose your friends by question yourself, would this friend hide me from the Gestapo, which is like the police, the German, the Nazi police, which did all the house searchings, right, for, people they were looking for, like, for example, most of the time, Jews. So she told my friend, so like, ask yourself, would this person hide me from the Gestapo? And if you answer the question with yes, then this person is worth of your friendship or is a good friend. And if this person would not hide you, don't consider this person to be a really good friend. So I thought about this sentence quite a few times during this year, because it is really kind of, it's like a test for people's qualities, actually. And it really makes your circles, of good friends smaller, or if people you would consider after it just like people but it helps in a way. It makes life much easier because there is much less people to focus on, because you really get to know people very fast. I mean, it's the same thing for people at work, like really I appreciate many people which I did not know so well before, but I really can count on them, like, for example, my cameraman in Ukraine, he's really a person I know I could trust my life with, because he drove us out of Kiev. So I know I can trust this person my life with, and this is something of huge worth. And of course I'm grateful for everything, I would say, because this is also something I'm really, I don't know, especially when I'm back in Switzerland, I have the impression that I'm such more grateful for, just like basic things, like having a place to stay. That's a great thing to have, like, because I understood in this, I was living in Russia back in February, because I was based as most of the correspondents, responsible for the so-called post-Soviet space. I was based in Moscow. So when the thing happened on the 24th of February, I immediately understood, which is also thanks to my ADHD brain, I immediately understood that Russia would turn into kind of a big North Korea, right? So that this country is going to shut down its doors, and it's going to be really hard getting out of the country, getting into the country. What any relation with this country is going to be a huge obstacle. So I called my husband and I told him, like, leave, like, leave the country as soon as you can. And for me, it was totally clear, and this as well is thanks to my ADHD brain, because for me, it was absolutely clear there was no other option. And I tried to get all, like, employees out of the country we had, like the cameraman, the editor, the video editor, because I thought, like, they're men. Their conscription is going to be a huge problem. They might be forced to join this horrible war as soldiers. So I contacted them and said, we need to get you out of the country. You can't stay there, it's dangerous. And I would say this is thanks to my ADHD brain, right? So that for me it was so clear.
It was your intuition, right? You knew, you could see what was going to happen before anybody else could see it.
Well, I would say besides the US intelligence services, they saw it before. But I would say, like, for those without special access to information,
Well, and it's so
compared to those.
interesting, Luzia, because on one hand, we're very optimistic. I always joke about time optimism. If I was able to get somewhere in 25 minutes one time on a holiday when there was no traffic in my brain, I now think, oh, it takes me 25 minutes to get there. So on one hand, we're very optimistic. But then on the other hand, you were, and I feel like this too, where I can see what's going to happen often way before other people can see it. And it's just clear, like, okay, this is what we need to do. And it sounds like that's exactly how you felt. And of course, you were right.
Well, I could tell you another story. I totally agree with you. I mean, I had like the impression, okay, I need to get my stuff out of Russia, right? All my belongings, right? My bed, like my books, everything.
You were living in Russia at the time?
Yes. Yes. So we had a flat there, like we had, my husband was there, my dog was there. We had just like, and at the end of December, we had like, we were joined by a very cute puppy, like a small Bichon Frise. So we had like this puppy at home and a cat and my husband and like all our stuff was there. So first I prioritized. I said like, okay, I need to get out with the dog, and he could not take the cat out. At the same time, there's a limitation of how many animals you can take to a plane as one person, right? You can only take like one animal, like at one time for one person, right? So, and he was traveling alone, so he took out the dog, and we were able to manage, to get the cat out of the country after a few months, luckily. So the cat is with us now, but as well. But it was really kind of a challenge, right? But coming back to the thing about our stuff, so I realized that, okay, I need to organize, from a distance, the whole like moving out of the country. So I organized because I thought like, okay, sanctions are going to happen, right? And the border is going to be closed and it's going to be problematic. Maybe there won't be any lorries. Maybe there will be huge queues. So we need to get our stuff out of the country, right? So I organized, when I was still like driving out of Ukraine, I was already organizing, like kind of these lorries and, like a company that would pack our stuff and things like that. So we managed to do it like, like from a distance, but in the end, of course, it was a huge, it was such a huge demand for lorries because so many companies were, like Western companies were leaving Russia because of the war. So like prices went up like crazy, like prices for lorries and all these transportation companies, they just skyrocketed, like it was just insane within a very short time. But so I was able, like to move all the stuff out of the country. And I'm, I think like I really appreciate by now having like a place to stay, which is really great. Having your stuff is something I never ever appreciated in my life so much. Knowing where are your shoes and your jackets and I don't know, your photographs, your wedding photographs. It's just like it's a huge privilege, which I never ever appreciated before. So,
wow. So you're the perfect example of being in your purpose. And what I always say is you don't find your purpose. It was always there. So you step into it. You've known since childhood that you wanted to be a journalist. And I'm curious, do you remember what it was about journalism that you were so attracted to? And how does that play out today? Is it still something that you love, even having gone through this experience? Maybe you even love it more.
Well, I would say I got interested in journalism because, like, for example, when the radio was on or when my parents were reading the newspaper, they were really kind of, paying attention to this. And this was important. Like when the news were on, whether on the radio or in the newspaper or on TV, it was like something you pay attention to, right? This is important. Like people tell us what's going on and we really need to know what's going on. So we listen to them. And I was really, like kind of fascinated by this focus of my parents to these kind of various broadcasts. And I think I started trying, like to focus as well and to understand, what was going on and what were they paying attention to. And I started actually writing a newspaper myself when I was, like I think like 8 years old or something. So I've done my own newspaper for my family, like, like with, I don't know, news about our cat and about like whether the weather is snowing outside or something like this. And, like I think the interest, like of the readers was kind of limited because, I've done like a lot of quizzes and nobody actually handed in like the answers. So it was like as an editor, I got very frustrated, right? I was like putting up a new issue of the newspaper for the family, and I was like writing, so nobody answered the quizzes of last time. Still, I'm going to do like quizzes in this issue as well, waiting for your answers, right? Kind of frustrated. But yeah, I think I never lost kind of the love for the job, because I think it's just, for me personally, it's perfect. You know, I have always the chance to talk to new people, telling their stories. And I think it's a huge privilege, you know, like to ask questions. Like, and there's so many things in this world that highly interest me. And if I can, you know, make a living out of asking questions and meeting new people, this sounds perfect for me still, right? I could not imagine, you know, like a job where I would be forced to sit inside at the same place and doing kind of repetitive stuff, which is absolutely terrifying for me. I think this is also related to my ADHD brain, but going outside, meeting people, telling their stories, always new people, this is something I really, really love up to this day. So I'm not doing quizzes anymore. I'm doing more of kind of, I don't know, different stories. But yeah, I'm still really in love with the job.
It sounds like for you, and of course, this is an ADHD thing, but it sounds like there's a lot of curiosity.
Absolutely. I would say this is actually the reason why I got interested in this region of the world in the first place, right? Because it was so different from anything I knew. I mean, I'm from a country where, you know, we're a really small country and people are always complaining, oh, we don't have enough space in Switzerland. You know, it gets really crowded in here with 8 million, million inhabitants. I mean, yeah, for someone in the United States, this sounds maybe like a joke, but yeah, for certain areas in this world, 8 million people is a lot. So in Switzerland, since a few years, there's always discussion about we don't have enough space, and prices for houses are skyrocketing and things like that. So in Russia, you really don't have that problem, right? So you have like a lot of, yeah, it's huge. It's like enormously huge. You can sit in a plane for 8 hours, and you're still in the same country, right?
What does it have? Is it true? It has like 14 time zones?
Yes.
I think that's what my son loves, geography and travel and all of that. And he told me that, I don't know, a couple months ago. I'm like, really? And so I've always wondered, was that true? That's insane.
Yeah, well, I would say the United States has a few time zones as well. I'm from a country where there is like one time zone. So
yeah. We only have 3, or maybe we have, maybe we have 4. Maybe we have 4. So Luzia, I have to ask you, have you met Zelensky?
Yeah, I have met like the president of Ukraine. It was at the press conference. It was in spring when he met with the UN General Secretary, with Mr. Guterres in Kiev, and they were meeting about agreeing on a green corridor for civilians leaving Mariupol, and for the for the fighters, the Azov fighters, which were back then captured, in a really difficult situation in Mariupol. And it was, they were meeting
in that church. Were they in? Was that the one where they were in that church?
It was not a church. It's like a very huge factory, a steel factory in Mariupol. And this steel factory was like their, place where they were still holding position, and it was like the last position which was under control of the Ukrainian army in whole Mariupol. So they got bombed like hourly by the Russian army, and so the situation was very dire there, and there were still civilians in this steel factory hiding as well, because they had like these very old Soviet bunkers at this factory. So people were trying to find a safe place there, and actually got locked up there. And it was very difficult, having no clean water, no food. So it was a really humanitarian catastrophe on its way. And the UN General Secretary met with the Ukrainian president, and we were able to attend this press conference. And yeah, for the very first time in my life, I was able to ask Mr. Zelensky a question. Of course, this was a very huge moment for me, because, it's like I was covering Ukraine before. So I was covering the 2019 presidential elections. And I remember, Zelensky back then was this candidate, very untypical candidate for any, I would say, presidential elections. Of course, like the United States, you had an actor as president as well. But, it was something totally new for Ukraine. And it was also very special because he had like this, he has this Slug Naroda, which is like the, I need to think about Slug Naroda, like the servant of the peoples. It was like a series where he played president. So he played president as an actor, and then he became president. So this was kind of a totally kind of, on one hand, an absurd situation. And of course, I was very impressed, like meeting him, because it is such a situation where I would say like Zelensky proved as a person to the whole world that when it comes, when it comes to extreme situations, he's someone the country can count on, right? So everyone who was like not taking him serious in 2019 and saying like he has no experience in politics, what kind of candidate is that? No one can take him serious. I mean, everyone got proof that you can take him very serious when it really matters. So I'm, of course, I would say, as most of the people I know, I'm very impressed by his performance as president. Of course, I think it's really impressive what he's doing. And on the same time, of course, I mean, his situation is unimaginable to me, because he's really, I'm sure he has much more information than he's able to share with any journalist. So he knows about, difficult situations at front lines, or, for example, how many people died in this war. So we do not know how many Ukrainian soldiers died in this war, but because they're not, publicly saying how many people actually died, because they do not want to, like when troops are fighting, it's considered to be very demotivating if you're telling them how many comrades already died. So they're not sharing this information, but I'm quite sure that he has certain, numbers at the presidential administration at hand. So I think for him, it's the more information you have, the more you know about how grim the situation is and about how many lives have been lost during the past 9 months. I would say the more devastating it is, and the more difficult it gets to make certain decisions. So I'm very impressed by his performance as president.
He's just an amazing leader. I mean, he doesn't ask his people to do anything he wouldn't do. He makes decisions quickly, and he's just really inspiring. I mean, all I do is follow him on social media, and I'm a little disturbed by, I don't know if it's just our country, but, being so fickle, but he was always on the news, the front of social media. And now I've noticed what's happening in Ukraine often doesn't make the front page. And I noticed that, his posts don't get as many likes. And I'm curious if that's a US thing, or is that happening in Europe as well? And I guess Twitter and Instagram would be worldwide. So perhaps it is happening all over the world where, it's just like, oh, well, we know that's happening, but, we're bored. We're on to the next thing, which is really frustrating.
I would say this is one of the problems why this war actually took place, because one just did not pay attention anymore, right? I mean, this whole thing started in 2014 and it actually never ended, right? Of course, like the scale was totally different. But back then, if the reaction would have been more severe and more swift, for example, to the annexation of Crimea, which is a part of Ukraine, I would consider that we would not have such a situation as we're having today. And of course, it's, it must be, for me, it's very hard to imagine how difficult the situation must be if you're actually, from Ukraine and you have, been witnessing what was going on during the last 8 years. And I mean, Zelensky was talking about it himself. He was talking about how he attended like the European Championship of Soccer in 2012 in Donetsk, when Donetsk was still, like this very prosperous town in the eastern part city of Ukraine. And that he was not able to go there anymore. And that for him, it's absurd that it's considered not to be part of his country by anyone. So that Russia is actually claiming, so this is now part of our country, seems absurd to him. And I can only, try to imagine how it must feel like if this is really part of your country and you have friends there and your friends were, forced to flee the city because the city gets occupied by so-called separatists, which are clearly backed by Russia. So it's really hard to imagine, like to be in this position. And I'm really not, I'm just feeling very privileged that I'm not, right? That I'm kind of, still, never mind how much this war affected me myself. It's totally different if you're from Ukraine yourself.
Yeah. Wow. Are you still going back and forth to Ukraine?
Well, there's like a thing, actually, now it reminds me of what we did not talk about yet. So this situation would have been complicated enough, right? Like the war going on, we do not having like a fixed home at the very moment, due to the war. Like speaking of me and my husband and our cat and our dog. So I got pregnant if this would not be like difficult enough, right? I got pregnant in a few months ago. So I'm now like 5 months pregnant. And due to security reasons, like by the Swiss law, you're not allowed, to put your employee into a certain risk area. So I was able to travel to Ukraine back when I was not pregnant. Now I'm pregnant and I informed my employees. So I'm at the very moment not able to travel to Ukraine. So like at the very moment, I have like a stop on traveling there myself.
Well, congratulations.
Well, thanks.
So is this something, Luzia, is this something we're not supposed to talk about?
Well, we can talk about it. Okay. We can talk about it. It's fine for me. The thing is, well, I'm still, working together with people. So this means like we're still producing reports. Like we have done a report this week about Kherson, which got liberated. Like when was that? On the 11th of November. So like 9 days ago. It's more than 9 days. It's already 12 days. So we still are doing like our reporting, but me, myself, I cannot travel there until the child is here. So that's quite some time if, I'm now 5 months pregnant. I mean, I totally understand it from the editor's point of view or from our company's point of view, but of course I would love to travel there. And I mean, I've been there while I was pregnant. I was just like, like in the first 4 months when I did not inform my, like my bosses, I just traveled there, right? So I was there pregnant. So, I mean, I have this experience. Of course, it's not like I'm not like the one who is, like on the very first front line. So I'm doing more of these stories like about people that got affected by the war. I'm not this, war correspondent that is embedded with the army going to the front line. There are always certain, when you speak about front line, there's like certain, there are more than 10 front lines normally, right? So you have like the front line 0, then you have the first front line, the second, the third, and so on.
And I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, I didn't know before either. So it was something I learned this year. Happy to share, right? So I'm not the one, who's going to the app, like to the 0 front line. I'm much more interested, I think, my duty is more to report about, like the influence on people's life, like people living a little bit further, like the civilians, about how they're coping, how the war affected their lives. So, of course, at the 0 front line, of course, this for a pregnant woman, this would be very dangerous because of the explosions and the shock waves that could really hurt the unborn child. So this would be something that's not recommended.
I didn't know that either. Oh my gosh. But it makes sense. Even the fact that a pregnant woman would constantly be in fight or flight in a war zone, right? And how that would affect the baby.
Right. I would say, I mean, I have the impression, and I read about, like the difficulties and the danger of, losing your child during the 3 first months. I, of course, thought, my child survived this. So my child is actually a little fighter, like my unborn child. I have the impression it's going to be kind of, like a very strong person because this child actually has been to Ukraine for several times within the first months of the existence of this unborn child. So I would say this child is going to be a very strong person, or I have the impression that it's going to be a very strong person.
Well, I think so too, though, because you're ADHD, right? So when everybody else was in fight or flight or freeze, you were like, I'm in my element.
Well, I would say so, right? I mean, I remember, a friend of mine, he's working as a press officer for the Ukrainian army, and I met him in Izium, and he was like, you are now here, and how many months are you now pregnant? And I was like, it was in September, and I was like at the beginning of the 4th month pregnant. And I told him, and he was like, this is so huge, right? You know that this is so huge that you're still coming here, right? Never mind what's going on with you. And I said, like, yeah, I mean, I did not have the impression, right? This is something that also I think it has something to do with ADHD. I have like, I don't know, I think not being so much worried about things that seem to be out of my control is also something that, you know, is thanks to the ADHD brain, because I really have the impression like at this moment I do not have like free space to think about this and to worry about this. I rather focus on what I'm doing at the very moment.
Yeah.
So
All the
yeah,
what ifs that usually never happen anyway, right?
you know, I talked a lot about our situation with my husband, of course, and he always said like it's so interesting to see that you're coping so well with all this with all this uncertainty. We don't know actually what's going on. You know, within a few weeks' time, within a few months' time, we just have kind of to settle in a totally new situation. And for me, this is like something that comes more natural to me in a way, because I'm like, okay, what can we do now? And it's like not such a, I don't know, I'm not thinking about, oh, this could be so much easier, or oh, if our lives would be just different or something like this. These kind of thoughts just do not come to my mind, because I think it's like the ADHD brain works differently, right? I'm trying to find kind of way, certain ways out, even if I'm now pregnant and I cannot travel to Ukraine. Okay, what can we do that we still can have, like reports? What can I do that the people in Ukraine still have the opportunity, to work for us? Because like, as I said before, it's difficult with jobs for journalists as well, right? So like people there are, because, imagine that the TV station is not selling any advertisement at the moment, right? So they have really cut it like the numbers of employees, and so many journalists are jobless now in Ukraine, which is kind of absurd in a situation where, you have so many things going on in the country and they would need reporting so much, and like the many journalists lost their jobs. So I really feel kind of obliged, like for the people working for us, that they still have the opportunity to work on, so
Yeah. So, Luzia, what do you think the key to living successfully with ADHD is?
I would say focus on your strength is one of the biggest thing that helped me, and coming to terms with the diagnosis and see it not something as that is always in your way, but something that you can actually use for good, and which helps you and maybe also like the people around you.
Yeah. Do you have a number one ADHD workaround?
Embrace your ADHD maybe. And I would say a watch is a good thing, not only in Switzerland.
Yeah. So what kind of watch do you wear? Do you have an Apple Watch or an Android watch? I can't remember what the Android one is called.
Me neither. I'm not sure. Is that now kind of advertising? Yeah, I have an Apple Watch. So yeah, which is very helpful with all the timers, right? I'm really kind of grateful for that, because otherwise, yeah, I would run late so many times more in my life, I think. I'm not saying that I'm so punctual as a Swiss watch. Maybe this is why I'm not wearing a Swiss watch, right? Too bad.
Well, the thing about like a regular watch is that you have to remember to look at it. And if you're not reminded, you're not going to remember to look at it. And that's the beauty of, any of these smartwatches. I think they're called smartwatches. I know they're called smartphones, that you can set those constant reminders so you don't forget. Literally, I can a half an hour before know that I have a meeting. I'm all ready to go, totally prepared. I start working on something. And I literally, in 30 minutes, I can forget that I had a meeting if I'm not reminded, because of hyperfocus, and we just forget. So one thing I do want to say is, a lot of times people will say to me, well, I can't afford an Apple Watch. And what they need to know is you don't need the souped up Apple Watch. You can buy the $200 Apple Watch. And I honestly believe that you can't live without it. It literally is my most favorite piece of tech. It has changed my life. And yeah, you just need the one with the reminders. So anyway, Luzia, where can people find you if they want to know more about you and what you do?
Well, they can find me on Twitter. which is like my name, and my surname, so Luzia Tschirky. Under the same like handle, I'm on Instagram. I need to say to people that most of the time I post in German. So I apologize, and I really hope that the auto-translated version of German into English is sufficient to understand what the hell am I talking about. So, and if not, just reach out to me and I'm more than happy to explain in English.
Luzia, how many languages do you speak?
Well, I would say like on the level of my English is like German and Russian. My French really is not, no, I don't use it. And if you don't use it, you lose it. So I would say I can understand French and I can have, I'm able to have a conversation, but my written French is not as good as
Wow.
it should be, I would say.
So, well, your English is excellent. So, have you always been good with languages?
I would say so, yeah. I would say languages were something that came easily to me, or more easily than other things that I seem not so useful, right? Languages, especially if you live in Europe, you're used to it. Like, for example, in Switzerland, we have like 4 official languages. And for me, it's something absolutely natural that a person coming from the same country is not speaking the same language, right, as a mother tongue. So I'm just totally used to it that it might be that I need to switch language for understanding a person that is, I don't know, living 200 kilometers away from me. And I would say this really helps when you're from an early age used to it. This really helps to understand that, yeah, languages are a really useful tool. And it really helps when you speak other languages. And this was also like a big motivation for me to learn Russian so that I would be able to speak to people directly. Of course, you have like all the huge advantages nowadays of all these kind of translation services, but still it helps so much if you have a knowledge of language and you can use it by your own, not depending on technology.
Absolutely. I'm so impressed. And I don't know if you know this, but I was born in Germany and my first language was German. However, I probably have a knowledge of German today, like your knowledge of French, meaning that I can understand most everything, but my speaking is pretty choppy. And the only reason I think I can speak German is because it was my mom's, first language, and she spoke to me for the first couple of years of my life exclusively in German. All the other languages, I can't. I'm not good at languages, but German, it was just that's how my brain was wired, so I could speak it, or at least, understand it. So there's one other question before you go that I've been wanting to ask you. Do you have really good working memory? Because I would assume that you're really good in front of a camera and just kind of ad-libbing and going with,
Well, actually, that's something I thought about many times when you were, talking to someone about your working memory in the podcast before, because this was something I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm really used to it either, or it just comes to me more naturally. I can, most of the time, I'm not taking notes anymore, even, I'm just like, it's like free speech. And I try to remember, okay, what about, I try to think, what do I would like to answer on this question? And then I try to say to myself before, but as it is spoken language, I try not to put it down because it's much more natural when you are trying to formulate it, and you're actually trying to say the sentence or the few sentences you're going to say on TV to a person, or I don't know, to yourself in the mirror before going live, than writing it down, because written language is much different from spoken language because the sentences are much longer and much more complicated, and it's just impossible, I would say, for any brain to remember it. And especially like for, your audience, because your audience is also only like seeing and listening. And when you're, saying sentences at live broadcast, which are meant to be written and not be spoken, so it's like very difficult to follow you and your thoughts. So it's much easier, like to stick to the spoken language. I would say this is something for me that is not so difficult. Actually, it actually has been kind of manageable. Of course, sometimes, after a live broadcast, you have like this moment and you think like, oh my goodness, like this sentence was actually not so very well pronounced, or I should have put it differently. But most of the time I get like the feedback from the editors, how the heck do you manage such long sentences without losing your thought? This is impressive. And for me, it's like nothing special. It's just like my brain works like this. I can remember where I started the sentence. But yeah, I'm very grateful for this, and I hope I don't lose it with the age, but I'm not sure about it. But at the moment, it's not a problem.
Well, if it gives you any consolation, I was never good at that. I forget where I'm going. And I think it's when there's even a little bit of nerves that's what really does it, because clearly when I'm comfortable and I'm just speaking to people, then no problem at all. I can speak all day. But something where I need to remember, okay, we started here. This is the middle part. This is the end part. And it needs to be tight. So there's more pressure, like when you're being filmed, right? That I've struggled with, but I have met so many ADHD women who, certainly on this podcast, who are so good at the working memory when it comes to, being on camera. And so I'm always curious, how do they do that? And I really am interested in your comment that when you prepare, the sentences are much longer versus when you're more ad lib, they're much shorter. So that's a really good piece of information. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Very happy to help.
Luzia, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. And thank you, too, for the important work that you do. I mean, good, accurate journalism, it is the backbone of a democracy. And I have so much appreciation for your work and just, you and your ADHD brain.
Thank you very much for having me. And I really want to say, if someone is listening to this podcast and is worried about, what I'm going to do with my brain, I'm just would like to encourage every woman that I'm sure there is something outside there which is really, really good for you and your brain and for all the people around you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luzia.
Thanks.
Before I leave you, just a quick reminder that our doors for our first ever January Your ADHD Brain is A-OK are open. And if you want to save $100, use the code HOLIDAYS2. You can go to tracyotsuka.com/AOK for more information. I would love to have you join us. So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Luzia, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. As always, you're listening to ADHD for Smartass Women. Come join me over at tracyotsuka.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week. You've been listening to the ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka, and we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Not coincidentally, ADHD for Smartass Women, it's also the name of our free Facebook group. We're a totally smartass community of successful, ambitious women who share our ADHD wins, questions, and workarounds. Join us at tracyotsuka.com, where you can also find more information on our Your ADHD Brain is A-OK system. I spy a happier life for us, and I'll see you again next week.